We're all here to talk about citizen planning. My name is Ellen Moss, and my panel over here will introduce ourselves. We're just going to say that we are all members of organizations and nonprofits in our community, board leaders, and our views here are of our own opinion. So nothing is said here represents any of the organizations that we are a part of.
Hi, I'm Marcia Jackson. I have been active in citizen organizations for all my adult life, including the community I'm in now. But I'm also, my career is in affordable housing and community development. So I bring that perspective as well to the discussion.
Hi, my name is Matt Minahan. I'm a community organizer, particularly around our peninsulas in Anne Arundel County, and a member of the Growth Action Network Board.
Hello, my name's Gary Mauler. I've been involved probably going on 35 some years in community land use issues, advocating for our community in Jessup, Maryland, Anne Arundel County. I've kind of had a strange background. I also own property in Dewey Beach, Delaware. So in Dewey Beach, Delaware, I served a term on the Planning Commission there, and then I was elected to the town commissioners. So I've seen it from both sides of the fence. I'm with Growth Action Network, which is a Anne Arundel County organization that advocates for responsible development. And I'm also a member of the Jessup Improvement Association. And we're in the middle of an area of rapid growth, and so we're happy to be here, and hopefully you'll appreciate our opinion. What I will say, though, is in this topic, the opinions and ideas are fluctuating, and they're all over the place. I don't think there's any right answer, but I think there's a lot of ideas that we all should consider and talk about.
Hi, I'm Paul Christensen. I'm a retired technology entrepreneur. I ran a business for about 20 years on the Washington Beltway, and then got kind of deeply involved in 3 citizens organizations in Anne Arundel County, where I lived for about 28 years. I'm on the board of Growth Action Network, along with these folks. Also Alliance for Livable Communities and the Chesapeake Environmental Protection Association. So I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
All right. So it would be fair to say that we all want to live in a vibrant, healthy community. And that it looks a little different for everybody. For some, it's living in a town center where you have transit and retail and a place for social gatherings. For others, it's living in a neighborhood where you have a commonality of houses and lower density. And for some, or I think for everybody, they want to maintain the existing character of their own communities. Some people want to live in, some houses are for starter homes, for adults that need supportive care from families. Good long-term planning needs to address all of these needs. Citizen planners are those who care about the issues and are willing to engage actively with the government planners to help determine how expansion of housing can best be accomplished in their communities. Some have professional backgrounds in certain applicable areas, while others are experts in history, geography, and problems in their local communities. They are generally well known and respected as concerned leaders by their neighbors, and these human assets should be used willingly and respectfully by government when considering how to incorporate housing expansion in their counties. Communications in both directions is a key in this regard. We know and live in the communities that we advocate for. We know what our communities have, we know what our communities need, and we know what our communities prefer. These are our neighbors, our friends, our families, and that uniquely qualifies us to be significant contributors to the discussions and decisions that will affect our communities for decades to come. However, many people do not understand the need to balance the status quo with the changing dynamics and the needs for both booming employment and poverty that exists in other neighborhoods. If citizen planners with expertise in other areas, but without expertise in affordable housing, are educated early in the planning process, they can help manage approaches within their communities that might allow for a more cooperative and less combative discussion with their communities they're trying to accommodate all these competing interests.
So some of the things that we consider in working as citizen planners, and I say often when I walk into a community meeting in my own community or in others that I work with professionally, there are times that I'm sometimes the only person in the room who understands anything about affordable housing, and when the term comes up, everybody else in the room has pushback. Affordable housing is a trigger word for many people. They assume the worst of the horror stories that they've always heard. We now know, because affordable housing, government subsidized or financed affordable housing has changed over the years. So there's much larger span of people, especially with the new workforce housing that comes up, that is for a somewhat higher income, up to about 120% of the area median income. But people hear the term affordable housing and they still think the worst of the worst is what's coming their way. So I encourage that the vocabulary maybe needs to change a little bit, and we need to present an understanding way and open up so that you're not only getting negative comments from people who are there. And the need of what is there, a lot of people, as Ellen said, there's people starting out in our neighborhoods. There's children of our families in the neighborhoods, and they have no place that they can afford to buy a home or even rent a home. So if the affordable housing is not only now the subsidized housing that hits these very low, moderate, and workforce needs, it's also market rate housing that's unaffordable for people. So all of those things need to get brought into comprehensive plans. So 30% of an income is what is usually looked at as what's reasonable of a household income, and that's unsustainable now these days. Doesn't really work. One of the people who just walked into the session, Sharon, I appreciate your push on public participation, because it should not mean just the people who are active and have affluence and means to come to the meeting. There are leaders in every single neighborhood, no matter what the income level. There are leaders there, and these leaders need to be reached out to, brought in to the conversation. If they're not polished speakers, they need to be given another way of participating in this so that their needs are met, and that the people maybe of more needs are able to understand why this discussion of affordable housing is so necessary, even if it doesn't meet what everybody wants their own neighborhood to look like. They have to open up because it's a community-wide area. So, that's...
Many jurisdictions make an effort to collect citizen input before making land use planning decisions. But citizens' busy lives and lack of understanding about what it is at stake often diminish the participation. Even when citizens have been engaged and informed, the development of recommendations and report writing is left to the professional staff. Even with its best intent, when the final report is actually published, participants in the planning process are too often surprised by what they read versus what they thought they said. How can citizens be better involved in land use planning? Should their input be solicited? Should they be consulted? Should they be polled? Should they decide what happens in their community? And how do you manage the tension between what the professional planners know about the code and zoning and what is desired by the local community?
I see this as an issue of high quality and putting the emphasis on the quality of life for the community or the additional people moving into an area and housing, so that they have a very high quality of life. That there's no compromises on the services, things like parks and recreation, different support functions, which may vary depending on the income level of who's living where. But I've seen personally too often where there's been some compromises maybe, and everybody has a different need, different want. Some people want to have in our area, some people want to have chickens and pigs in the backyard and ponies, and other people want to come home and not be bothered with any yard maintenance or whatever. But it all varies. But like I said, I think in the land use planning, I think we need to really put the first priority on building communities that are people would just basically die to live there. They'd be high quality and encourage pride in the residents that live there. I think the issue that we have to deal with is time. So citizens have to manage their volunteer time and how many hours that they can donate to working on commissions, working on planning committees, attending town meetings and whatnot. And I think it's important that as elected officials and county planning groups and whatnot, they need to allocate an adequate, reasonable amount of time. I've seen too many times where it's been a rush. We have to get this done by this date, and we kind of gloss over things, and that leads to problems further down the road. One thing that I heard in the last session, so we got in there a little late for it, but I'm a firm believer in the need for professional-led listening sessions and sessions where you're getting feedback from the community. Facilitators. It's a difference between night and day of somebody that just gets to say, you're going to lead that meeting, versus somebody who is trained and certified as a professional facilitator. And I think that's something that, especially going through a small area plan or general development plan, anywhere where you have to receive ideas that are all over the place, and you've got to kind of funnel them down to get to a consensus decision. Having a facilitator gets you there faster and makes better use of the citizens' time in attending meetings. And I think what we need to do across the board is to take a look at technology. When you have a planning commission, or where there's debate, discussion, or you're trying to work with a group of people from a community to figure out what the real issues are, there's some technology that was developed back in the 80s at the University of Arizona by Dr. Jay Nunemaker. And it's called Group Support Systems. Another term, if you did a Google search, would be Group Decision Support Systems. And it's software that will guide a meeting through a whole process of brainstorming, prioritizing, voting, and promote real-time collaboration. And the biggest thing about it is that in any meeting or group of people, you always tend to have hidden agendas. And, you might say, well, and I've seen this as a commissioner in Dewey Beach, is a lot of people, they will talk to me out the door, after the meeting, before the meeting, but during the meeting, they won't talk. And a lot of that is they don't have the confidence, maybe they don't respect their knowledge. But a big problem is the introvert and extrovert scenario. So in any group of people, there's probably, even in this room, there's probably a third of us, statistically, that are introverts. And those people have a lot of very good ideas, but by nature, they're not going to participate. With things like this decision support system, it's all electronic, all the discussion and brainstorming can be anonymous. So you don't have to worry about that you're in the room with the general and you're only a private, because we don't see what your title is. All we're looking at is the idea. And that alone is worth the price of the whole system. The research, just to give you a background, is it was funded by DARPA, the guys that brought us the internet, IBM, the Navy, and other organizations, and we used it at Westinghouse in Northrop Grumman. I could tell you, take a look at, do a little Google search for group systems, and take a look at some of the papers that Dr. J. Nonemaker wrote, and I think you'll be impressed. And it does work, and it gets you to an answer and consolidation of ideas rather quickly. So I'll move that on. You want?
Yeah, I'll just make some quick comments. In my point of view, both professional planners and citizen planners occupy a service role. Our job is to provide professional planning services to the citizens, the current citizens, the people here now. And to do that job, we really need to get a lot of citizen input, and I think we've heard that a couple of places. But the citizen input really has to pull a train of planning in my mind. We got to start with that first. It's got to be thorough, and we've got to understand what we get. So I think the planning departments should invest heavily in outreach, and I don't think a lot of them do, frankly. That's my impression. Corporations understand that. They know that you got to go and dig out the customers and hear what they have to say. I think that planning departments are less like that. The outreach is the key to effective planning. And we know that citizens are busy. It's hard to get their attention. And it's not enough to just post request for information on the internet or the whole small listening sessions. You really have to find a better way. You have to find out ways that work. And I think that this is a place where the citizens' desires can vary a lot locally, and so that even complicates the matter more. But this is a place where citizen planners can help because they live in these local areas, they know the people, they have contacts, and they can help make these connections to gather information that we think would be critical for effective planning. So I think it's important that citizen planners be brought in early to the professional planning process and used as effective tools for outreach to gather this information. And then when we've collected all that we need, then I really believe that professional planners can go to work, they know the code, they know all the ins and outs of things, they've had a lot of training, and they can go to work and write a draft plan, but it will be based on what the citizens, the people here now, would like to see, and that's the ultimate goal.
I'll just add one other point here, and that is watching the slide that we saw in the last session here, Arnstein's hierarchy. I think all of us have been in all 7 of those levels on that hierarchy. And I got to say, as citizen planners, we can contribute in the top 3 much better than we can contribute when we're being placated and listened to with a grudge or listened to as if we're irrelevant. So, and the other thing I'll add is good citizen planners are working in both directions, not just tugging on the coat sleeves of the planning department, but also communicating back to our communities about what's going on in zoning, what's going on in subdivisions, what's going on in development. and making sure that our constituencies are well informed about the kinds of public hearings that we've been talking about. So when you're planning a public hearing, I would strongly encourage you to find the citizen planners in that jurisdiction and ask them to broadcast your message so that you can have a broad range of perspectives in your public hearing.
Let me just throw out something that if you were last year at the conference, I was on a panel with a lady from Howard County and also two ladies from PG County. I'm a technology guy. I'm a computer guy. And the ladies from PG County, I was amazed, and maybe you want to go back and look at or listen to the presentation, but they were using virtual reality software tools to bring in the citizens and to collect their inputs. And I thought that was just phenomenal to use virtual reality, where you walk through a virtual room and you look at virtual bulletin boards or paper posters on the wall, and you comment virtually. And maybe that was because of COVID, is what motivated them. But that's still, it takes advantage of the citizens who don't have necessarily the time to drive. In our county, you might drive an hour to get to our Annapolis to participate or look at something. So, and then of course in Anne Arundel County we got traffic. We have traffic. So virtual reality and those take advantage of the new technologies that are out there to help modernize and make the interactions more efficient.
There is a growing awareness across the country that our zoning approaches, especially for single-family homes, have had the effect of redlining in many neighborhoods and out of the reach of lower and middle-class families. Leaving aside whether this is intentional or not, in many cases it has mandated lot sizes that are much larger than one single family needs. Efforts are underway in California, Gainesville, Florida, and now even in Baltimore to loosen the restrictions of zoning in single family neighborhoods, to allow auxiliary dwelling units, duplexes and triplexes, and other approaches that would reduce the cost of housing and put it within reach of more diverse ownership in terms of race, age, and income. What role does zoning play in making housing where you live more or less accessible to more people? What factors should local governments and professional planners consider when thinking about these questions? Would you support loosening up or doing away with zoning restrictions in your jurisdiction? And what downsides do you see in this approach?
So we're definitely going to have a few differences of opinions that you'll hear, and there's even within one community you'll often hear differing opinions. You know, when we live in areas that are all single-family homes with large lots, and there's new development coming in, and Gary and I and Ellen actually all live in an area where there's just huge new developments of single-family houses, mostly very upper income, and apartment buildings where there used to be forests. So we always want to have the environment taken care of and everything else. But we also see a need for improvements and changes. So the single-family zoning, as I said, we are priced out of the market for many people. The fact that we can't then have either be parents who want to live near their children on an accessory lot, something like that, or have children before just coming up, you want to do that. This is clearly one of the most contentious issues that we have. One of the things that we say in our neighborhood is like infrastructure first. So you can maybe change the zoning, make it, especially for affordable housing. My position as an affordable housing person is that there can be exceptions in case-by-case basis where these affordable homes are being put to some of the density and other things, but infrastructure first. We want to make sure the roads can have the capacity of the new housing. That's often the problem. It lags a long way. So that's really one of the issues. We don't have the same water and sewer issues that some of the more rural areas have in controlling them that you all have been talking about. But that's the thing. And getting over and really some of it is just explaining the really dire need to make these exceptions. So that's...
Well, I'll just throw in a little different perspective. I think that attacking the affordability problem by increasing density is really an overly simple solution. It assumes that housing will automatically be built if we do away with things like single-family zoning. And that's not clear at all. I don't think that has the broad support that it needs to make that effective. A lot of people don't like that. A lot of people see value in having a little more space. And they paid for that, they're going to fight for it. And I don't think we should expect it to be otherwise. There are better solutions. I'm sure there are better solutions, and I think if we had more time, we could talk about some of those. But however we do it, however we do things to generate affordable housing, I think there's something that we really have to be thinking about up front. And that is that if one small jurisdiction successfully builds a substantial amount of affordable housing, that's not going to address the problem, because we got an imbalance of supply and demand. And a small increase in supply will not meet the huge sea of demand that's out there regionally. So locally we can help things, but unless we do a lot of other, unless we make a lot of other rules about who can live there, we'll just have people driving in from the next county, and there will be enough of those that overwhelm whatever we build. So it really needs to be a regional solution, whatever that solution is. And I think that this is a place where maybe groups like this that are regional could be talking about things like that. How do we keep from really making each other islands of affordability, and in that process losing sight of our goals?
Okay. Well, let me just add my 2 cents to it. And like Marcia said, we all have different opinions. Zoning regulations to me are important. And, zoning regulations were the result of numerous meetings by citizens and planners and commissioners. And, it defines what that community, what that particular culture of people, how they want to raise their families. And I think all this really talks about families and the quality of life and providing a healthy environment to raise our next generation. I do been to sessions where the speaker actually took the position as they know better of how we should live. And I think that's very dangerous when somebody says, you should be living this way. This particular case was the person thought that people should be living in high-density housing in Washington, D.C. And they happened to be very upset that a lot of the people were saying, I'd rather live in Frederick. I'd rather have a hayfield next to me or cattle or whatever. And that's okay. Everybody has different desires and whatnot. To build on what Paul was just saying about the supply and demand, and that seems to be the consensus, is that the more housing units that we have, it should drive the price down. Brookings Institute estimated, and I don't know when this estimated was done, but probably a little while, at least a year ago, and it was 3.7+ million homes backlog in this country. And as that report was published, we're having thousands of people coming in for various reasons into the country and being distributed across the country. So it's a target that's hard to really match. And then you find that we have, not too far from where I live, a project where it was probably about 22 homes per acre, very large, high-density development, and we have others that are maybe are five homes an acre. And so you would think that higher density would mean less construction costs, less land acquisition pricing costs, so on and so forth. But it turns out that the higher density project is selling for almost in some cases, depending on the size of the unit, twice as much as the lower density. So that theory doesn't seem to play out in actual practice. The other thing that it concerns me is that, on the surface, it sounds great to, allow higher density development building, but in some cases, you're talking about having to retrofit older communities and older infrastructure, especially in a city, for example, where your water pipes, your electric, and your plumbing is probably buried under concrete and asphalt. So a system that was designed by engineers would be designed to meet that capacity that was built 30 or 40 years ago. And now if you go from one house per unit of land to 4 or more, the need of the capacity of your infrastructure is going to go way up, and you're going to have to do something, dig up all the streets, or who's going to pay for it? So there's a lot of questions about just saying we're going to release zoning regulations and allow higher density. You got to think about all the other things that are impacted. And when I hear discussions on the internet and meetings, those people don't tend to think the big picture. And I think we all have to be, a phrase that we used at Northrop Grumman was systems engineers. You got to look at the big system, the big picture as you're doing your planning.
One of the things that can be a solution that some counties in Maryland have done already is when there's new development, new housing development, it's required to be mixed income. So that there's a percentage of the units that are built that have to be, if they look just on the outside, just like all the other housing in these areas, but they're set aside for people of other income levels. And therefore, the operating income or the sales income, depending on what it is, from the higher cost ones subsidizes the lower cost ones, and it's a way, mixed income communities really work well. They're not segregating people into a place where they feel like they're in some sort of a ghetto. They're not huge amounts of poor people moving into a more upscale neighborhood that is going to freak everyone out. It's a manageable mix. It gets people an opportunity to actually improve their lives. And I think that in at least one of the jurisdictions I just learned recently that, a developer can pay a fee and not have to do the mixed income. It's better to actually have the mixed income. But if there's a way to do that in how you're looking at your land use plans and what the requirements are for zoning, that's a great way to increase affordable housing while you're also building market rate housing.
Thank you. It is clear that there are challenges, potentially negative consequences, from relaxing the runoff, impervious surfaces, forestation, parking, and traffic requirements by increasing the density of zoning, particularly in neighborhoods that are mostly residential. But if new straight-up homes like this quickly becomes undesirable for the very people who might work there, creating longer commutes, difficulties in hiring and retaining employees, greater traffic, greater increased vehicle miles traveled, and greenhouse gases. What do you see as the challenges for redevelopment proposals? What criteria should be used to approve them? Who should foot the bill for infrastructure upgrades needed to support development?
I'm going to have a very general response to this, and other people will have a little bit more specifics. But redeveloping housing, especially in cities, because affordable housing is best built and best serves the people if they're close to services that already exist. So you don't want to put something out there. They need to have either ability to have transit or walkability or not be that far from where they might find their jobs. And redevelopment can work like that. There are many, many old schoolhouses that have been converted into either affordable senior apartments or even family apartments. There are old warehouses that are abandoned. They're now finding many, many retail places that are abandoned, and office buildings soon. There's going to be a huge flood of them, which perhaps could be redeveloped in this way. And they're usually in places that have other services available. So that's my take on that, and more people will respond.
Well, I'll just offer that I think that planners and the general public need to have a much better understanding of the costs of redevelopment versus greenfield development for a project. It's just, I don't know about, maybe everybody knows this and I don't, but I hear from developers that, hey, it's so expensive we can't afford to do that, but I need to understand, there's no more detail. And how can you make decisions without being able to analyze that? So I think that the redevelopment is going to be something that is going to have costs that vary a lot from site to site, and from the type of development, one type to another, and that sort of thing. And we need to have some basic understanding of these costs. And then I think that we need to be able to get more detailed input about this. And certainly I think if our government is going to put money into redevelopment, subsidies or whatever, then we have a right to demand that the developer shows his costs, and that we can see that this is how much it costs, and this is what our contribution is buying. And in the process of looking at several of those, we're going to learn as well. So I think that we really need to somehow get our hands around that, and maybe a consulting service here, a developer, a third-party developer that could look at things with an impartial eye and say, hey, look, this is where the costs are, this is what this guy's fighting, and let the government sit down with the developer and say, hey, let's find something that works for everybody, and know that you're not being fleeced. So I think we just need to know more about how much these things cost.
I'm going to continue on with the discussion of cost. I was going to cover this later on, but let me just bring it up now. I think I served on a citizen advisory committee for a general development plan, and almost every meeting the developers in the room said, we need incentives. County executives showed up, and it came up again. And I said, who is working the model that determines what an appropriate incentive should be? How do we know that that's a reasonable incentive? And so there are companies. At Northrop Grumman, I managed a software license contract. It was over $1 million a year, and it was from a company called Gallerith. And Gallerith provided tools that we used, and just about every aerospace Department of Defense contractor uses to submit bids to the government. And they're requiring that because the Gallerith has a database, knowledge base that they develop across the industry, and they can calculate the actual cost of a multi-million-dollar air defense system, and we were finding out that it was getting us within about 5% of the actual cost. And I did talk to Gallerith in the last week or two, and they do have some expertise in the building trade, and they there needs to be more exploration with them about what they can provide for planners. But a tool like that takes and looks across the whole industry to find out what the actual costs are, and you get it basically does a sanity check on what something would cost. And so you don't just, the government does not, the DOD gets beat up if a contract is overrun, overbid, underbid, and they wanted to make sure that they were getting the right honest numbers. And I think when we start talking about redevelopment, there's a lot of costs associated with that. There's discussion about incentives. What should the citizens, the government, put into the project? What should private industry put into the project? And I think county governments, town governments need a way to say, yeah, that number's right, or no, he's too low. It should be this. And I would challenge you to look into either developing your own model independent of what a particular developer tells you. Not accusing them of being dishonest, but you need to know for yourself, is that number right? What should it be? So I'm kind of a firm believer in that we need to have financial models developed and cost collected from what different projects cost. And then you have an idea what your town or county or whatever should reasonably put into that project, and where is the payback? So that's all I have on that.
I have a slightly different view. I just read Ezra Klein's column in the New York Times a couple days ago. You might have seen this. He's talking about why affordable housing in Los Angeles, which is well funded, has taken 3, 4, 5 years before a shovel of dirt has been turned. And the dynamic is that there are so many funders with so many requirements, private, public, financial, etc., that nobody can agree on actually how to put the project forward, because there are so many cooks in the kitchen. So, in answer to the initial question, who should pay for infrastructure improvements, I think where there's market housing, the developers ought to pay for it and not burden the taxpayer. However, where you're talking about subsidized housing, workforce housing, rental housing, that ought to be borne by the taxpayer. And with as few outside stakeholders invested as possible. Citizen input, tons. Lots of local opinion should be collected, tons. But in terms of who actually governs what's in the project, there ought to be as few cooks in that kitchen as possible, so that developers don't spend 5, 6, 7 years figuring out what they can do with this big pile of money. And in this case, it was mostly federal money. So I strongly encourage. Ezra Klein has 2 articles on this topic, one this week and one from July, that I think are really worth reading. I'll add one other thing here, and that is, I think this touches on the whole question of economic development. And in this case, I think there's a kind of a circular relationship between housing, which attracts jobs, which generates more housing, which attracts jobs, more jobs, which generates more housing. And there's never a time when they're in stasis. There's never a time when we have the right houses for the right jobs. Sometimes the number of jobs declines and we have an oversupply of housing. Sometimes, as we're experiencing in parts of Anne Arundel County, we have a huge influx of new employees and not enough housing. And so trying to find the stasis point, I think, is something that government is not particularly good at, because it demands some agility. It demands some quick response. We discovered that Fort Meade is going to have 25 or 30,000 new employees in the next couple of years. Well, and maybe that's true, maybe it's not. We think we heard it. No one can quite tell us for sure. Our government is acting as if it's true. And yet, the comp plan is in draft. Local communities are being consulted. We're in a 6-year process of consulting local communities on the comp plan. And until then, we're trapped here with this huge demand and a mismatch between supply and demand of housing.
And that lag that was discussed in the last session really, really impacts this. I mean, we've had new, in the county, some new laws passed by the county council that would limit certain kinds of developments, and they're mushrooming up all over the place because they've been in the pipeline for so long, and there's no way to stop them, and they've sort of missed whatever the deadline is to limit that kind of development. So, get that lag down as best you can.
Smart growth. We've all heard the term. It was clearly defined and understood at one time. However, it's been appropriated by the very interests that actually work against its very concept. Developers use it now to escape zoning restrictions, increase densities, and avoid infrastructure improvements. The term has now lost its meaning in general conversation, but its principles are still valid and should be considered as part of the conversation when correctly applied. Exactly how is smart growth defined? How can we as planners rehabilitate the term smart growth and ensure that it is not compromised by those who misapply it? Can smart growth designs work for retrofitting older communities?
So Paul and I did some Googling on the term smart growth, and we found a definition on the Smart Growth Maryland webpage that we looked at and said, you could drive a 20-mule team through that definition, and just about anything would apply. So we kept Googling and found something at smartgrowthamerica.org. I want to read you their definition because I think it's much stronger than ours in Maryland. Smart growth looks different from place to place. It's an overall approach to development that encourages a mix of building types and uses, diverse housing and transportation options, development within existing neighborhoods, and robust community engagement. And then they've got 10 principles there. Mixed land use, compact design, range of housing opportunities and choices, create walkable neighborhoods, distinctive, attractive communities, develop direct development toward existing communities, a variety of transportation choices, et cetera, et cetera. When you look at that definition of smart growth, that's not what our developers are arriving at when they submit their sketch plans and say this is a community based on the principles of smart growth. We're not seeing mixed land use development. We're not seeing compact design. We're not seeing a range of housing opportunities and choices. So my wish for you professional planners is that don't be duped by some of the language that's been misappropriated by development interests and hold their feet to the fire. Look for these 10 elements in these development applications, and if you don't see them, make them disclaim the term and take it back out. But unfortunately, as I said, and I think as Ellen said in her question, I think the term has fallen into disrepair, and we're advocating strongly that we resurrect the term and use it appropriately, and then hold developers accountable for using it properly.
Well, as both Ellen and Matt have said, smart growth has been hijacked by almost everybody, and we're often not sure exactly what it means. I'm going to try to make some smart comments about smart growth, and hopefully you won't throw things at me at the end. smart growth is basically built around the assumption that growth is inevitable. And we're given this picture that there's going to be this horde of people coming at us, and we have to figure out what to do with them. And maybe if we put them all in some high density area and sort of confine it there, that we can minimize the damage. We can keep from hurting our forests and farmlands, and we can put less stress on our transportation systems and all those things. And in some sense, that strategy makes sense if you assume that growth is inevitable. Now, one of the other things that you miss there is that if we put all these new people in this designated area, this target area, what about the people that are there now? We're just bombing them with growth. And that's going to cause a lot of trouble because we haven't really thought about that. And if we are, as planners, are planning for the people here now, that should be a question that we ask. What about these guys? Now, I want to mention that one of the things that's gone on recently in Anne Arundel County is that we've had a reputable survey group ask the question, what growth rate do you desire across the county? What growth rate do you desire? 60% of the respondents, 60% of the residents of the county said slower or no growth. And I think that should be illuminating for us. The people here now don't want to see more growth first. Smart growth isn't the issue. And we also have to look around, and I think we can find other examples in other places. I suspect we could see some here in Frederick, which grew, as I understand it, about 22% in the last decade. And I suspect there are a few people in this room who lived through that growth. And I would be interested in knowing whether they feel like their quality of life has improved as a result of it. If it hasn't, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? So we have to come to terms with the question of how much growth is enough. Where do we stop? Where do we put out the no vacancy sign? And aside from commercial interests, we're going to find that we don't have to get very large before most citizens feel like their quality of life is deteriorating from growth. Bigger is not necessarily better. We should be focusing on improving quality, improving services, improving schools, improving all these things. And growing bigger is something that we'll have to fight against to do that. So we have to learn to question that assumption that growth is inevitable. Now, we live in a democracy, and we have a lot of tools that are at our disposal if we really decide, if we have the political will to limit growth. And it won't be easy. We'll have to fight a lot of development interests. There's a lot of money involved in this. But there are examples of jurisdictions that have done this. And I'll just mention three. One is Petaluma, California. Another is Boulder, Colorado. A third is Sanibel, Florida. Unfortunately, I hope it still exists. But they have shown that you can limit growth and been very successful and been doing it for years. They've had numerous legal battles about this. They've come out ahead of it, and it can be done, but it takes political will. So I think that smart growth is smart in the sense that the strategy is smart, maybe, if we forget about the people in the growth area. But maybe we have to ask a bigger question is, how much is enough?
Just one PS on that. We comfort ourselves in Anne Arundel County that our growth rate is under 1%. Well, it's only 0.7%, 0.8%, so that's really not all that bad. But when we look at it over 15 years, that's closer to 12 or 13% over 15 years. When we take a longer view, a lot of 1% add up to a lot of growth. And so we encourage you as professional planners to be asking a question similar to Paul's. What's our maximum capacity? And that competes with the question, how much land do we have to develop? And the land we have to develop is one question. What we can do on the land we've already developed, redevelopment, smart growth, is a whole second question. And we encourage you to just take a long view on this and not be comforted or seduced by, well, it was under 1% this year, and it was a little bigger than last year and a little smaller than the year before. Over 15 years, those small percentages add up.
They certainly do, Matt. And just one other thing, that's still only half of what Frederick grew at. And it's the United States as a whole, the population growth rate in the United States as a whole is 0.5%. So it's twice the growth rate of the United States as a whole.
I would add to that comment that, and I had not heard that part before, but of the 1% growth rate there was, probably 0.1%, if that much, was affordable housing.
Yes, I agree.
So we have people who are here, and whether there's a new people coming in or not, we have people here who need to have housing that's quality and gives them an opportunity to improve their lives. And that we don't have.
Piece in the Baltimore Sun, just before the COVID, we had a need for 82,000 more homes in the state of Maryland. And this past year, the number was 132,000 homes. We are short, and this is across all income ranges, we are short 132,000 homes in the state of Maryland. So, some of this is happening in Montgomery, PG, Anne Arundel, Howard, some of those places. If you look out to the eastern and the western counties, the demand is probably not so intense, but 132,000 homes short is a big number. I think it's a societal question, not just for planners, citizen planners, professional planners, but for us as a state and us as a country. What is our obligation to people who live here, work here, and want to live here and work here? And to what extent can we shorten the vehicle miles traveled and improve the quality of life for 132,000 families who don't have homes?
With more people working at least the professional people working from home 4 days a week at least and not commuting in, I think some of those pressures are going to go to the farther out counties and not to be limited to the closer in metropolitan ones, because for 1 day a week, people might be willing to make that drive where they wouldn't be for 4 days a week. So watch out, it may be coming your way.
Well, that's the story of Frederick. That's the story of Frederick. How many people in Frederick are driving to teach in Montgomery County, or driving down to NIST, or driving down to NIH, or driving into some of the suburban Montgomery County jobs, and some into Baltimore, into Social Security. So in that regard, Frederick has become, as has Charles County, become a bedroom community for people drawn to these larger economic hubs. Yes, okay.
Many people say that more homes result in more taxes, taxable income for the government, but that isn't necessarily true. There is research that demonstrates that while commercial development generates taxes sufficient to pay for itself, housing does not pay for itself in taxes once roads, schools, water, sewer, and other costs of amenities is added up. Knowing that, what should jurisdictions do when housing development proposals are submitted? Should builders be required to fully fund their projects even when those costs will be passed along to buyers, which would raise the purchase price even further?
Paul, do you want to start this?
Yeah, I can try. I think that it's sort of well known that in most cases residential housing development does not pay for itself in tax revenue that it generates. And in a way, the first reaction is this doesn't really make sense. But if you think about it, what's going on there in terms of operation and maintenance costs with yearly tax expenditures, commercial development generates a lot of tax money, but it doesn't use a lot of services. It doesn't use schools, for example, and that's half of the budget.
Linkage. I'm sorry, but we've got to talk about the linkage impacts of commercial development, because it does impact all of the services of the community.
Well, yes, it does. I mean, indirectly it does. But if you try to say, okay, the budget has to balance, the only way you can get it, you can see that how that's going to balance is if commercial taxes, property taxes, subsidizes effectively residential.
The linkage impacts the services it requires to attract employees.
Better than housing. I mean, Paul's point is...
It's linked to housing.
Yes.
Employment is linked, it impacts, it drives the requirement.
Jobs to housing, jobs to housing.
Fees, I'm sorry, I just had to say that because it's a false dichotomy.
Yep.
Unless you understand the role, the relationship and the driver that commercial development is on communities and housing, roads, schools, not in isolation.
So you're basically saying it's worse than it seems.
Exactly right, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, and so all residents would have to pay higher taxes to make up for the revenue shortfall. All residential citizens, and so to minimize the capital side of that, the capital expenditure side of that, we have impact fees, and certainly I think it just makes sense that developers pay those and pass it along to the new purchasers. Otherwise, we just wind up paying for that. All of this, it's spread across everybody, and that just doesn't seem right. So I think that developers really do have to pay those impact fees, and we've got to be sure that those impact fees are covering the real costs, and which I think in a lot of cases they don't. And I think we also need to make current citizens aware of the tax impact on public facilities and that sort of thing associated with new development and linkage. So it may be acceptable to residents in some cases. Affordable housing may be an example, but we need to know, and it needs to be really laid out there and made clear. And I think just the fact actually that we're talking about it here, it's not publicly understood. So this is something we need some education on.
We have time for probably one more question. One more question? You get to pick on them. Red tape or empowering citizen planners?
Well, let's do empowering citizen planners. In our experience, we see data supplied for a development project and its intended consequences are those provided for by the developer. Traffic studies are technical, full of arcane data that is almost impossible for citizen planners to penetrate, and are often of dubious quality and integrity. The same is true with stormwater plans and even grading elevations. Even community meetings required by code are advertised, convened, led, and reported on by the developers with no input or validation from career or citizen planners. Half of citizen planners challenge these reports and studies paid for by developers. Is there enough credibility afforded to citizen planners who don't have a PE license? How can citizen planners empower themselves to have standing and credibility in dealing with governments and developers?
I'll start this question. I've been interacting with the local government in Anne Arundel County. I've sat on the other side of the table down in Delaware, but I think the power is in numbers and connecting up with your community, your neighbors, networking with other citizen planners. I thought this conference, I wish we had gotten here earlier and could have interacted with you guys a little more. But the one group that I've joined recently was Growth Action Network, and the name kind of speaks for itself. It's an organization that's concerned about growth and quality development. They take action, and to me the most valuable thing about being in a county-wide organization is the networking. So I've met these people, and I've learned so much over the last year and a half by meeting them and hearing the issues across the county, some of which I didn't know. There's another group that I was really impressed with, because it's in Jessup we're seeing a lot of the new development going in. It doesn't appear that the quality of development in terms of environmental water runoff is being really understood and designed well, and that affects the homeowners, not the day they buy, but 2 years down the road when the foundation cracks and whatever. So we have a group called Anne Arundel Watershed Stewards Academy, and a lot of citizens are signing up. It's a year-long, I think, class.
It's not a year-long class.
What's that?
It's not a year-long class, but they have a class every year.
Oh, they have a class every year, but it's an intensive training, and people that do take it are certified by them. This group works with Anne Arundel County Public Schools, and we've met, and some of the people that are certified have come out to Jessup, and there's an issue, that's going to be an issue in 2 years, this is a problem. So, having those kind of resources for citizens to find non-professionals, others that are willing to donate, I guess you might say amateur consulting, but it's not really amateur. I mean, it's the things that this one particular gentleman came up with, he beats the professionals. He's getting it right. And so I value that. I think another thing that citizen planners need to do is you need to send a lot of emails to your legislators and the planning and zoning professionals. They need to know you on a first name basis. I was impressed here recently at some campaign stops, and the politician got out of his limo or whatever, walks over and, "Hi Gary, how you doing?" And I'm thinking, that's good, and now there was Paul organized video presentations from some of our politicians running for office, and the one person said, "And Jessup," and I'm thinking, right on. She knows us in West County and Jessup, and that was the first time I ever heard a countywide politician mention my little town of Jessup. So the other thing my wife says, you all need to write a book. That's how you get, write a book, have some view graphs, PowerPoint slides, makes you an expert, like any consultant does. They write a book and they have presentations. And the last time we went out to a political gathering, we wore a T-shirt that had Jessup Improvement Association. And I can't believe how many people came up. "Hi, I see you from Jessup." "Yes, I am." And that way you get a one-on-one working relationship with the professionals and the legislative individuals that are voting on different decisions. So I think those are the things that I have found to be useful. Having that visibility, making yourself bigger than life. T-shirts are great. I mean, we protested one thing one night, and I had the thing on the back of the shirt, and the Channel 2 News was there, and they picked up on it. So there's things that citizens, yes, we don't have that PE stamp, but we're independent thinkers, and we have the eyes and ears in the community where the issues are, and in a county like ours, and I don't know all the other counties, but at least in Anne Arundel County, it's an hour drive from one part to another, maybe more than that. So having eyes and ears on the ground, we've found through experience, is very important. Some of the county officials that come out said, we never drove off of 175. We just thought Jessup was one street. And they came off and they found that, you got farms, you've got all kinds of stuff, just like other parts of the camp. They were surprised. So having that relationship and meeting with people, bringing them out to educate on our particular community has proved to be very valuable.
I'm sure that all of you really want to see a whole bunch of more community people coming out to your meetings and participating, but I really, we can encourage you to reach out further into your communities as you're looking at where you want to have growth, where you need to have additional infrastructure put in, all of those things. People on the ground really know a lot, and you're not going to hear it if they're not part of the process.
I just want to add to that in our case, the people in the community want to feel like they've been listened to by those people who are sitting at a desk making those decisions, who might not even know what the topography is, what the road conditions are, what the traffic conditions are, because they've never been to that community.